The old man asked for extra ketchup at Burger King, and the manager mocked him. But his true identity silenced the entire restaurant. It was a blazing summer noon in Texas. The sunlight hit the sidewalk bricks as if trying to sear right into people's bones. Inside the Burger King, the air conditioning was cool and gentle, carrying the faint scent of fries and grilled meat. Customers bustled in and out, some ordering drinks, others grabbing fast meal combos. Everyone was busy, everyone in a hurry. Everyone seemed wrapped up in their own little worlds. The front door opened with a small ding. An old man stepped inside. His back was slightly hunched, his leather shoes were scuffed at the heels, and the collar of his striped shirt was frayed. On his head sat a faded baseball cap embroidered with the U.S. Marine Corps logo, now just a shadow of its former self. He didn't look at anyone, simply walked quietly to the order counter and asked for a regular burger and a cup of water. No one paid him any attention. Only when he came back with his tray of food and walked toward the condiment station to grab a small packet of ketchup did a few heads finally turn his way. He hesitated. Looking at the tiny ketchup packet in his hand, he turned back to the counter, where a young woman in a Burger King uniform was busy checking the soda supply. In a quiet voice he asked, "Excuse me, may I have a few more ketchup packets?" Before she could answer, another voice rang out from behind. "Ketchup's not free. If you didn't order a large meal, you only get one." The voice belonged to Amanda, the midday shift manager. Not yet 30, blonde ponytail, sharp features, and an even sharper tone. Though she was behind the counter, her voice was loud enough to make 3 nearby tables look over. The old man said nothing. He nodded gently and turned to walk away, but before he could take a step, Amanda added, "This isn't a place for begging. Ketchup cost money too, you know." A few customers chuckled, not kindly, but the kind of laugh you hear when someone's humiliated and it doesn't affect you. In the far corner, a freckled boy about 10 years old looked at the old man with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. He tugged on his mother's arm, trying to say something, but she didn't look up from her phone. The old man, Chuck, didn't respond. He simply bowed his head slightly to the manager and walked to an empty table by the window. He sat down, unwrapped his burger slowly, like it was the first meal he'd had in days. Behind the counter, another employee, Tyler, glanced at Amanda with a look of discomfort. He muttered, "That was a bit much." Amanda scoffed. "What do you know? Guys like him hang around all day, always asking for free stuff, makes the place look bad." Tyler didn't answer, but he kept watching the old man. Something about the way he sat back straight, his calm expression, and his hands resting neatly didn't fit the image of a beggar or vagrant Amanda claimed he was. Meanwhile, at another table, a group of 3 delivery workers was taking a lunch break. One of them pointed toward Chuck. "Look at that old guy, got yelled at just for asking for more ketchup." The second man snorted. "Serves him right. If you can't afford food these days, just cook at home. Burger King isn't a charity." The third man, a bit taller, went quiet. He stared at Chuck longer. Something about him felt familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Outside, the sun scorched on. Inside, the air conditioning hummed steadily, but there was a strange tension in the air, like someone had accidentally dropped a glass, and it hadn't shattered yet, but everyone felt it. No one knew the calm would only last 10 more minutes. And the old man, who had just been ridiculed for asking for ketchup, was about to silence the entire restaurant with an identity no one dared believe. Time ticked by minute, like a clock on the wall no one noticed. Chuck Norris sat there quietly, chewing slowly. Not rushed, not flustered. Occasionally his hand trembled. Not from weakness, but from old habit, a reflex born from years lived on the edge between life and death. Across from him, the freckled boy kept glancing over. At times he looked like he wanted to leave his seat, but his mother's stern gaze held him back. Nobody wanted their kid talking to a strange old man who looked poor. Amanda was busy taking inventory, dyeing her hair in the restroom mirror. To her, the old man was just another difficult customer, a forgettable detail in a hectic workday. No one noticed the black van quietly pulling up behind the Burger King. The masked men. Inside the van were 3 men dressed in black, thin gloves and military male masks. One spoke in a deep voice. "Now's the best time, the place is packed. Kids, loners, families. We go in, grab the cash and get out. No unnecessary harm." The second man adjusted his contact lenses and sneered. "And if someone gets in the way?" The first one replied, coldly. "Then deal with them, but no marks, and nobody touches a kid. If a child gets hurt, everything falls apart." They all nodded, then quietly opened the door and stepped out, blending into the crowd like 3 regular customers. Inside the restaurant, seconds before the storm. Amanda was about to sign off on a supply delivery when the door chimed again. Ding! The 3 men walked in. No one paid much attention. T-shirts, sunglasses, sneakers. They split up and took seats at separate tables. Each ordered a combo meal like any normal guest. Chuck didn't react. He merely glanced at them, his eyes sharp and trained from a lifetime of spotting trouble. But there was nothing obvious yet. Every movement they made was smooth and precise. Then one of them calmly stood up and walked toward the cashier. He smiled and said, "Sorry, can I get an extra bag? Oh, and open the register, please." He pulled a small pistol from his waistband. The first scream. Amanda screamed. One of the employees collapsed to the floor in panic. Customers erupted in chaos. Drinks spilled, trays clattered, children cried, and adults dove for cover. One of the men slammed the butt of his gun against a table and roared, "Everyone down! No phones! No polish!" A grandmother trembled behind the pastry counter. The freckled boy clung tightly to his mother, eyes wide and wet with tears. Chuck sat still. The look that didn't flinch. The third thief walked slowly down the aisle, scanning like a predator picking out the weakest prey. As he passed Chuck's table, he stopped. The old man's eyes weren't scared. Not angry, not shaken, just steady, as if he had seen this 100 times before. "Old man, get down." Chuck didn't move. I said. Before the sentence finished, a hand shot out and seized the thief's wrist, stronger than anything he could have imagined. In an instant, the balance shifted. Chuck yanked him down. A crack echoed through the restaurant as the thief's arm snapped. He howled in agony. A customer screamed. The other 2 robbers spun around, guns raised. But Chuck was already moving. With a backward kick, he knocked his chair into one, then lunged like a thunderbolt. In less than 5 seconds, all 3 men were down. One had a shattered knee. One was unconscious, choked out in Chuck's steel grip. The last writhed on the floor, arm twisted backward like a rag doll. It happened so fast, no one even had time to scream again. Burger King froze. All eyes turned to the old man. Amanda stood frozen. Tyler's mouth hung open. The young mother held her son tighter, her eyes locked on the man who had just saved them all, the man they had dismissed just minutes earlier. Chuck took a breath. Calm, modest. He placed his cap back on his head and returned to his tray. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Outside, a police cruiser screeched to a halt at the entrance. 2 officers burst through the door, weapons drawn, then stopped in their tracks. 3 men lay sprawled across the floor, 2 unconscious, 1 moaning. Their wrists bound with a Burger King apron string. Not a single bullet had been fired, not a single customer was hurt. And in the middle of it all, an old man with a silver beard sat quietly, finishing his burger. Lieutenant Marks surveyed the scene. He saw Amanda clutching her chest, hyperventilating. Tyler looked pale. The freckled boy still clung to his mother, but his eyes never left the old man. Marks barked. Who neutralized these guys? Silence. Chuck set down his tray and stood up. He adjusted his shirt, then calmly walked toward the officers. I did. His voice was even, deep, unshaken. The kind of voice forged from 1,000 hours of discipline, not loud, not boastful, but one that silenced a room. Not just an ordinary old man. Marks squinted. Something about this man. "Who are you?" Chuck simply shrugged and handed over a worn old card. Not a regular ID, but a military credential from the National Strategic Tactical Response Unit, a division long disbanded over 20 years ago. Marks took it, stared. His eyes widened, his throat went dry. "Oh my God, this can't be. Chuck Norris? Colonel Charles D. Norris?" Tyler's eyes bulged. Amanda stood paralyzed. Marks turned back to the staff and customers. "Does anyone here know who this man is?" No one answered. Amanda was still struggling to reconcile the man she had insulted with the legend her father used to tell stories about. A story unfolds. Marks spoke again, this time softly, almost to himself. "In 1985, your team stormed a Panama base and rescued 32 hostages without firing a shot. In 93, you were the sole survivor of a mission in North Africa. You crossed the desert alone, carrying strategic maps, surviving 18 days. You retired in 2001, disappeared since then. People thought you'd died or gone into hiding." Chuck nodded. "I don't like crowds, but I can't sit still when kids are in danger." A shift in eyes. The freckled boy stepped out from his hiding place. His mum tried to pull him back, but Jamie walked up to Chuck and looked up. "Are you a real superhero?" Chuck knelt down and smiled kindly. "No, I'm just someone who did the right thing when it mattered." Jamie offered his hand shyly. Chuck shook it gently. Then came a slow clap from an elderly woman near the back. Then another. Soon the entire Burger King stood up, clapping for the man they had misjudged. Amanda lowered her head and approached him, eyes lost like a scolded child. Her hands trembled as she extended 2 ketchup packets. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Chuck didn't take them. Instead, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Next time, try to know more before judging someone, especially the elderly." A day no one would forget. The police handcuffed the 3 robbers. Paramedics arrived to check on those shaken by the event, but Lieutenant Marks stood still, his eyes locked on the old man with deep respect. Chuck walked out of Burger King alone, no escort, no fanfare, just a quiet stride into the Texas sun. Behind the glass, young Jamie stood, watching the man he'd now always remember as a real-life superhero. That night, Amanda went home and sat down at her computer. She opened Facebook and began to type. "Today I learned the biggest lesson of my life from a man I insulted for asking for extra ketchup. I've never felt so small. He didn't need a gun or to raise his voice, just his presence and calm. His name is Chuck Norris. Remember this, never judge someone by how they look, and never assume you know someone's worth just because they seem small or quiet." 3 days later, Chuck sat on a wooden bench in the city's Central Park. Behind him, old oak trees stretched their shadows across the soft grass. The afternoon sun warmed his shoulders like a gentle hand honoring a soldier after battle. He never returned to Burger King, not out of resentment, just because he didn't like attention. The days when people called him a hero had long ended, at least in his heart. A soft click-click of bicycle spokes approached. "Jamie." The freckled boy stopped in front of him, holding a brown paper bag with a red ribbon tied around it. "I brought this for you." Chuck looked up, surprised. Jamie blushed. "It's not from the restaurant, I bought it myself. There's ketchup in there, 5 packets. No one argued this time. Chuck chuckled, a warm, quiet laugh that seemed to soften the whole world for a moment. "Thanks, kid, but the thing I like best is kindness from the smallest among us." The people left behind began to change. Back at Burger King, Amanda rewrote the employee code of conduct. At the bottom, she added a single line. "Every customer carries their own story, even if they're just asking for ketchup." Tyler, the young employee, signed up for evening martial arts classes after getting advice from a police friend. If you want to be like Chuck Norris, start with discipline and humility. Jamie began a diary. The first page was titled, "The Hero in the Worn-Out Shirt," a window into the past. One afternoon, as Jamie shared a meal with Chuck on their usual park bench, he asked, "Did you really fight in battles?" Chuck nodded and, after a pause, began speaking. His voice pulled Jamie into another world. "Once I led a team into a small village in the Middle East to rescue hostages. It was freezing that night. There were only 5 of us and over 30 armed guards. Were you scared?" Chuck paused. His eyes gazed toward the lake, where the sunset danced on the water's surface. "Of course, everyone's scared, but if we let fear take over, those people wouldn't have survived. Fear is normal. What matters is not letting it stop you from doing the right thing." Jamie nodded solemnly, eyes wide with understanding. The name Chuck Norris returns. Chuck tried to remain low profile, but the story spread like wildfire. A small article titled "The Hero Among Us" made rounds online. A local TV station requested an interview. Chuck declined. But the host, once one of Chuck's old trainees, pleaded, "Not for fame, Colonel, but to let the values you stood for live on." Chuck finally agreed. On one condition. "Don't call me Colonel, just call me an old man who still stops to help." A letter that changed everything. One morning, Chuck received a package without a sender's name. Inside was a handwritten letter. "You saved me that day, not just from getting arrested, but from myself. I was one of the 3 who tried to rob the Burger King. I'm not proud, but when you looked at me, not with hate, not with rage, but with disappointment, something broke inside me. That look made me wake up. In turning myself in, I'll face the consequences. But I just wanted to say, thank you. No one ever told me you can be different, but you said it with your actions. Sigh, the one you forgave." Chuck read the letter, his hand tightening slightly, not in anger, but emotion. Some battles, he realized, didn't need weapons to be won. A legacy shared online. People began sharing photos of his old cap online. Some added halos in Photoshop. Others just wrote, "Chuck Norris doesn't fight for fame. He does what's right, because that's how he was raised." Amanda now trained new Burger King staff. Her first lesson had nothing to do with flipping burgers. If an old man asks for ketchup, give him your whole heart. The final automaton. That fall, the oak trees in the park began to shed their leaves. Chuck still sat in his usual spot. Children sometimes came by to chat. Adults brought him coffee. No one called him Colonel, just Uncle Chuck. One morning, he wasn't there. But on the bench, beside his old cap, sat a piece of paper. "I'm old enough to know the world doesn't need more heroes. It just needs more kindness. If you ever see someone overlooked, ask them what they need. And don't let a ketchup packet stop your heart from being open." The final lesson from those who listened. A real hero doesn't need you to remember their name. They just need to be there when someone needs them most.